Hello, this is my research presentation about the interaction between parental behavior and motivations to drink alcohol in high school students, written by Alexandra Voss and Kirsten G. Anderson. I'm Vex Maldonado, and this is a social psychology 11 5680. Starting with the introduction, the purpose of the study was to examine whether or not adolescent alcohol use is predictable based on a variety of factors, which include reasons to drink or abstain, how strict someone's parents are, alcohol permissiveness by peers' parents, or any combination of anything previously stated. This study is important because it seeks to understand what factors and variables influence and contribute to adolescent drinking. With this information, as a society, we are better able to address this situation and create prevention plans to mitigate the usage of alcohol in teenagers. As a brief introduction to the article, the essence in their research was to primarily improve life quality and reduce alcohol dependency amongst teenagers. As during adolescent development, it is an absolutely crucial period in which alcohol can inflict life-lasting damage. For example, the detrimental effects in numerous domains within the physical and mental health, acute injuries, worsened academic success, relationship decay, and a diminished neurocognitive growth. Their research also stood to comprehend how drinking behavior can reciprocally influence through the conformity of peers, parents, peer parents, and society as a whole. They also mentioned past theories of drinking habits and motives, the choice of abstinence, as well as the situational factors we face on. Now, let's move on to the core of the article. Going into the problem and hypothesis, the question that was set out to be answered was: is the relationship between parental attitudes towards youth drinking and adolescent consumption in the past month moderated by motives to drink or abstain? Their hypothesis was based upon prior research and findings, which states that a higher intensity of adolescent drinking is to be associated with greater motives of abstinence, lower strictness from parents, and a, a high alcohol permissiveness from peer parents. They also expected to see the inverse relationship between parental strictness and alcohol consumption to be moderated by motives to drink, specifically social and enhancing motives, and which by motives to abstain. Next, let's move into the method section. The participants were high schools of all grade levels who attended a private Catholic school in the Pacific Northwest region of the USA. All students were accepted into the study as long as they had submitted a signed parental consent form, which 98% of the student body had. While there were a total of 1,088 eligible students to participate within the school-wide online survey, 32 participants were excluded from the study due to confounding variable management. This was disclosed if a majority of the survey had been incompleted, contained dishonest or incomplete answers, creating a final sample of 1,056 participants. In terms of demographics, there were a variety of variables that were measured. Here I have displayed a table number 1, which features the demographics of all participants of the study. I'll highlight a few just to convey some of the questions that were asked on the survey. For example, the study consisted of 536 male students and 520 female students, which is a very fair gender distribution. The average age of participants came out to be 15.6, with a standard deviation of 1.2. The number of students, for the most part, is fairly distributed throughout grade levels, noting that the correlation between higher grade levels, the smaller the class. And when looking at the race category, we can see that the school is majorly populated in white people, holding a percentage of 84.1%, while Asian, Latinx, and Hispanic and other students who are categorized as African American, Black, Indian, Native, Pacific Islander, and Plus all remain under 10%. Moving on to the methods continued. The variables that were measured include a general alcohol use and consumption, motives for drinking, as well as any parental factors. The researchers of the study were better able to operationalize these complex variables through the usage of the Drinking Motives Questionnaire Revised, which is also known as the DQMR. And as seen below, you can see what it consists of. But practically, it was designed to measure drinking motives in adolescents and college students alike throughout the United States and even Europe. Its structure is simple by having participants indicate reasons as to why they may drink alcohol through the rating of a number of questions based on a 5-point scale, starting at 1, which stands for almost never, and 5, which reads almost always. Nevertheless, the method of data collection had an excellent rate of reliability amongst the recorded sample size, and this, of course, allowed for proper extrapolation of results. To gather the data for this research project, participants were first instructed to attend computer labs during any study class period. From there, they were instructed by research assistants to reread the consent participation form, and once they attained it, the students were able to participate within the online survey, which was developed through the SurveyMonkey provider. The survey's completion duration was estimated to take roughly 40 minutes, and the actual content of the questionnaire consisted of questions like demographic inquiries, school performance rates, prior alcohol use, or any reasons to drink or abstain, perceived parent behavior, as well as extra information that was not used in any final conclusions. Participants were permitted to skip any questions or stop at any given time. Of course, this was all possible by first getting approval from the high school administration as well as the institution ethics review board. Then, let's dive into the results and data of the study. Let's highlight some of the major findings that were found within the completion of the study. The first being that GPA remained a statistically significant predictor of lower quantity and frequency of drinking in adolescents, and that those with a high GPA report to have drank less within the past month. Another being that interactions suggest that youth who exhibit high motives of conformity were more likely to consume alcohol regardless of having a higher perceived parental strictness. Furthermore, it appears as though peer parental permissiveness in relation to drinking resulted in a greater intensity in underage drinking when there were low coping motives. And lastly, it was found that youth with fewer motives to abstain were less likely to drink within the recent past months when their perceived parental strictness was high. To the right represents figure 1. We can see QF, also known as quantity and frequency, being the dependent variable, whereas parental strictness is the dependent variable. This graph represents how parental strictness is often associated with a lower quantity and frequency of drinking among students with low, but not necessarily high either, conformity motives. This graph is important because it reveals a correlation between these two variables and contributes to any overall conclusions that were reached within the study. Nextly, moving on to the discussion. From the results, they were able to derive that adolescent drinking patterns in the past month were predictable, and by one's motives to drink or abstain, as well as the perceived strictness of one's own parents and the alcohol permissiveness of peer parents. The data revealed many correlations between multiple different variables. For example, the findings indicate that individuals who are fearful of social rejection or isolation are more likely to drink due to situational peer pressure. It seems as though conformity motives overrule any previous parental influence or guidance in regard to underage drinking. There also seems to be external social contingencies with the environment that appear to be more important than distilled contingencies, meaning that based upon our surrounding environment, it would appear as though peer expectations dominate any known expectations of our parents, as judgment will only come from those who stand witness of our direct actions, showing that perhaps the best way to reduce adolescent drinking is to reduce or cut off peers who engage in such risky behaviors. More data reveals that parental strictness is not as relevant for individuals who are not inclined to consume alcohol due to higher motives of abstinence. However, shocking data displays that more than 20% of students who had attended a party where underage drinking was accepted by a host parent or parents. During these instances, adolescents were associated with drinking a much higher quantity and frequency of alcohol. Despite all of this, their original hypothesis proved to be correct, as motives to abstain modified the relationship between parental strictness and alcohol consumption. It was seen that parental strictness overall correlated with lower rates of drinking in addition to low abstinence motives. And then here we have the conclusion, where real-world implications of the results can be found within the creation and placement of multi-component underage prevention programs that span from both home and school-based environments. They have been found to greatly reduce the amount of usage in adolescents and high schoolers, and in turn supplies the youth with many other benefits, such as significantly reducing the age in which one would find themselves interacting with alcohol, and delaying the overall quantity and frequency for those who do find themselves drinking alcohol. Overall, reducing the harmful effects of conforming to peer pressure and social norms. It has also encouraged many parents and families to better encourage and increase motives to abstain, as direct messages allow for students and youth alike to better internalize and understand what is being told of them. This, of course, also influences a positive parenting behavior. Then, when looking at the potential limitations of the conducted research, we can first conclude that the sample size gathered was from a Catholic high school, which could suggest some significant differences between students at non-religiously affiliated schools. Another flaw that would have been invaluable for the study would have been the direct opinion of parental attitudes towards underage drinking, rather than the participants' personal views. In turn, this would have allowed for a much greater generalizability, not to mention how a student's motive to drink and abstain may fluctuate through the duration of high school and ultimately life. Similarly, this can be seen with parental behavior and opinions, as motives can change over time as their children become older and much more responsible. To fix this issue, a suggestion of conducting a longitudinal study could take place. Future research could also carefully differentiate between the parents of close friends as opposed to the relationship between a parent of a distant acquaintance. But most importantly, would be to note how the MAAQ, which is also known as motives not to drink, did not properly demonstrate adequate reliability. This forced researchers to turn to the usage of an aggregate scale to determine motives not to drink. Unfortunately, by doing this, it would have limited their ability to examine any subdomain differences. Moving on to personal critique, I overall thought the idea and execution of the study was well performed, almost excellently. However, I do believe that there were some gaps in the information or additional procedures that could have been included. For example, one vital element of most scientific studies or research would be the inclusion of a control group, and this experiment did not just have that. Of course, I would imagine it difficult to create one from an online survey, but other than gathering data, we don't see much of a direct before and after results that we see in most experiments. The process was the extrapolation of data collected then to find ways to approach the issue. Sure, there was the elimination of confounding participants. However, with response bias, it would be incredibly difficult to say that all data from the participants was 100% truthful and honest. Perhaps if the experiment were to have included an incentive for those participating in the study, they might have led to more accurate results. However, I definitely understand that they might not have had enough funds to supply enough goods for a sample size as large as 1,056 students. We also have to consider how some students would even gain access or obtain alcohol in the first place. For example, how could the location that the study took place in increase the odds of adolescents' access? Besides the issues that the researchers have already stated about their study, I will have to admit that I was thoroughly impressed with the sex sample size almost being 50-50. However, I do believe that the diversity of race within the school might also raise concerns to the generalizability. Some information that would have been perfectly fit within the concept of this study would have been the consequences that drinking delivers to the body, not only acting as a toxin but also a depressant. Because when under the influence and in an unstable state of mind, it could lead to other dangerous decisions and activities. For example, drunk driving or the participation of drug use, both of which can be and are very lethal. Otherwise, I thought the points written in the study, the discussion, conclusions from the study, and real-life implications from the experiment were all very well-oriented, detailed, cleared, and understandable. And lastly, here's the reference to the actual peer review article that I created this presentation from. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Professor Duarte, who has guided me in the short but enriching summer session.